So much like Kevin, we deal with data. But we come at it from a slightly different perspective. We have been working in mapping and GIS for, well, I have particularly for 35 years. So everything that I do has a spatial context. And so we started out working, or we have been working in natural resources, more recently with municipalities. And if you think about it, the crossover is really that a farm has a piece of property, a city has a whole bunch of pieces of property, and they are in some degree related. So we've been kind of building mapping software. So where Kevin and Light Farm come at it from a very user centric model with the farmers, we're coming at it from a very data centric. So it's a bit more, it's a different way of looking at it. We are a commercial entity. We are a company based here, and part of our goal though is to work with open source technologies. So the open and iOpen is really kind of focused on three things: open data, and then open source, and then open access. So we're trying to, although we are commercial, really protect users' data. It is forefront in all that we do. So you know, if you're working with the data, you can choose to share it, or you can choose not to share it. And so a lot of what we've been talking about over the last few days, last 2 days, is you know, how do we get the farmers to participate, and they can choose how they participate. So what are we doing? Well, we're incorporating a whole bunch of different tools or data sets into a web-based tool. So we can run AI algorithms. So we kind of allow the researchers or experts to put artificial intelligence tools in the back end that can create derivative data. We incorporate weather devices and other sensors in, so you're pulling in IoT type data. We've been working with Bing and his team on the Blueberry project, on the other projects, pulling in both drone and satellite imagery. We work very closely with what I would call OpenGov data. So the Canadian government has thousands of layers of data. We bring them in, we make them accessible. The provincial government has many hundreds of layers of excellent data that is free, available for use, and can be very powerful in starting as a baseline. So we pull that in. So we have approximately 1,000 layers that are immediately available to pull in. You can pull in things like thermal imagery and cameras. We were working with free range chicken farms, and one of their big problems is that the raptors come in and snatch the birds. So by putting cameras up and tracking it, we can actually help them to leverage some of their data. And then of course, they're pulling all this data in with GPS, mobile devices, that kind of thing. Sensors and devices. I mean, really, if it's an IoT device and it has an API or it collects data, we can go grab it. One of the things that we've been doing for many years is what in the data world is called ETL, extract, transform, and load. So we can get access to data that doesn't normally share or play very nicely together. Financial systems, for example, are often one that aren't easy to integrate. So as Kevin's talking about integration, I'm kind of drooling because we love to integrate as well. So the aerial imagery, this is, as you can see, some of the drone data. These are some corn on the left-hand side, silage crops. On the right-hand side there is blueberries. So the cool thing about these, some of the drones that you saw Bing flying are fairly pricey. These are actually flown with my sub $1,000 micro drone. We can use open source tools to pull them in. We can get about 3 centimeter accuracy. In the engineering world, they can use these drones to actually work for engineering type plans. So we can use them. They fly for 15 to 20 minutes per battery, but the open source tools allow you to kind of pre-program the flight, and then we stitch it all together. We can do industry standard analysis on it. So for basically $2,000, you can have access to drone data yourself and then publish it out. It's pretty cool. And because it's a micro drone, sub 250 grams, as long as you're not flying around airports or restricted areas, you don't need a license to fly it, which is also really cool. Yeah, so compliance and traceability. A lot of what we're actually working on is what we're calling RESTful blockchain. So essentially blockchain that is accessible through a REST API. So if you're looking to have sort of really high quality auditable data, so if you're looking for carbon type tracking financials, then we can tie that in. KPIs. So basically, as we capture data, we can start to pull out analysis through a dashboard. So these are just this is one of the projects we were working on. Yeah, so basically capturing data and then using it. Every farm I go to, they have at least 5 years worth of binders, paper sitting on the shelves. And the challenge is that they spend a lot of time doing paperwork. And so we are always looking for ways to take that paper, make it digital, give them the ability to use that same data for audits without having to manage it. So talking about soil reports, for example, often they come back as PDFs. So we've built OCR tools to map the forms. So it's really about getting some sample forms and then being able to deal with that. This is a really cool project. This was Abbotsford Food Asset Mapping. So working with UFV, we actually started tracking all the food assets. So it's looking at farms, but in a different way, looking at the context of the farms in relation, or food in relation to other resources. So we're working with Fraser Health and UFE, and really the goal was here to try and correlate the relationship between food assets, high quality versus low quality food assets, and public health. So, by tracking where food assets were, as we're all aware, when it flooded out here, Chilliwack, for example, was cut off, and so they became the food assets became a really big deal. This is another one. And this one is really actually the roles of tracking vertical farming. So something we aren't dealing or haven't talked about here, but it's actually when I mentioned the kind of trying to figure out farm values. This is one of the reasons that we were looking at that economic value of land, because they're able to put vertical farms on non-farm areas and wanting to be able to claim that. The cool thing about this and the relationship, although it may not seem like it, is that one of the big parts of this project is actually mapping carbon. So the vertical farm is growing lettuce locally. All our lettuce comes from California. So looking at what the costs of growing lettuce locally and the carbon footprint we save by keeping it local. And so we were using census data and food miles data to try and, it's a different way to track carbon and carbon access. So this is just kind of a map. I'm not going to go tip the projector, but Agrilyze sits at the bottom there, and we're essentially feeding data from all sorts of resources into Agrilyze and then feeding it back up to allow more analysis to be able to happen. This is, you'll recognize this. This is Bing's project. And then this is the low cost one. So getting the same types of data with a low cost drone and open source technologies, and then sharing it. Okay, so part of what we're going into going forward, I didn't mention we are part of the Digital Technology Supercluster project. So we work with Terramera, we work with SFU, and one of our project is the standard data platform for autonomous agriculture. So we're trying to build a standardized data platform. And so we had a number of data scientists actually helping us to go and analyze all the data standards out there. And so we came up with one that has been around for about 20 years, but it really does a very good job of mapping soils and crops and food assets. And so this data standard, the schema that is available is what we have really built into Agrilyze. It is not the only way we can do it, but because this is really well documented, gives a great deal of metadata. So the data about the data, which is really what has come out over the past 2 days as being super important. Who collected it? What was the quality of the data that was collected? When was it collected? How long has it been accessible? So all that stuff is there. My slide deck goes on with this stuff a little bit later on. I won't be talking about it, but it does kind of tie into what Sarah Louise is talking about. And then this is really the more interactive planning platform that we're trying to kind of, if you want to call it a digital twin, I guess is really the term we use within our project. So trying to deal with high value specialty crops, broadacre row crops, and controlled environment agriculture, and pushing all this data down at the bottom up through to come up with some crop characterization, soil characterization, different types of outcomes. Yeah, and that's my Agridata standard, so I won't go there. So I will stop there. I know we were kind of short on time, so I cut it short.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. The relevance of your work to a lot of the work that ACART has been doing has come up many times in the past year, so it was a pleasure to have a chance to have you present and share more detail about what you're working on. Yeah, you know, one question that comes to mind for me is just like, what's the possible connection between the work that's happening in this super cluster and something like the Living Lab where it is working on the ground with farmers? Maybe that's like a bigger conversation.
No,
we can
it's
have
actually
today,
a really good
Yeah.
question because we are wrapping up project one of the supercluster. And I think there's certainly opportunity, particularly as we look at parts of that and we move towards project two. So we are working with UFB, we are working with SFU right now. I've been talking a bit with UBC. I think there's an opportunity to tie some of this work that they're doing in there. And obviously, the more partners we have with researchers or field
level research.
farm, the better it is. I mean, the overall outcome of the supercluster for this project is commercialization.
Right.
So trying to take the data that is being gathered here and look at ways to turn it into value for farmers, for the province, for the federal government. So.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that you've been here for the 2 days. Has been online for 2 days, and feel like you guys are a cross connection point between these two projects. So,
any other questions?
Yeah, questions? Questions online?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Shabtai here again. Amazing talk. So are you able to discern from your data, you mentioned about food sources, are you able to discern where the animal populations are within Fraser Valley in terms of numbers of chickens and different types and so on? And if so, is the industry concerned about that, and is that data available? We would dearly love to get our hands on it from the standpoint of distribution.
Yeah, we don't have or we haven't collected access to that. There is some degree of agricultural animal husbandry, if you will, but we certainly just in terms of the free data that's accessible, no. For counts anyway. We've certainly looked for it and it isn't available. Typically, I would guess that farmers aren't really jumping to share that data. I should mention that our data kind of comes in 3 flavors, if you will. So there's the public data that I mentioned. There's kind of the shared data. So if you're a crop consultant and you have 30 farms you're managing, you would be able to see all those farms, or it's private. So the farmer can only choose to keep it to themselves. And each layer of data is locked down. So it is kind of on a layer by layer basis. So and I didn't mention, sorry, the data anonymization. So we did an IRAP grant where we focused on trying to anonymize data, and then had the same sort of traded the scientists and tried to de-anonymize it. So it was pretty successful. We wanted to they knew exactly what their counterpart had done and they weren't able to de-anonymize it. So certainly there's, Kevin mentioned some cases yesterday where I think it would need to be analyzed a bit more deeply because you only have one farm in a location and everybody knows what that is. But we don't necessarily specify that it is a single farm. So it can be de-anonymized to larger spatial areas.
Great, well, I'm sure that.
But the drone data, can that be used for
Yeah.
this, or is it used for that?
Um,
That's what I was wondering about, not so much the other data sources, because I know about those, but
Right.
just, this drone images that you showed suggest that you can tell.
yeah, you
I mean, I
could
could almost tell how many chickens there
Look-
were in those 3-4 barns. Sorry,
if you were flying it, you could definitely tell, but I wouldn't be flying it without the farmer's permission. So
okay,
they could certainly provide that information. And I mean, right now, I guess if you're an avian farmer, there's a lot less birds around that you're counting anyway.